The quantum entanglement chamber hummed with an ethereal blue glow as Dr. Sarah Chen made her final adjustments. Outside her lab at the Advanced Physics Research Institute, Seattle's typical rainy evening cast long shadows through the reinforced windows. She'd lost count of how many nights she spent here, pushing the boundaries of what humanity thought possible about quantum communication. Running final sequence check, she announced to her empty lab, a habit formed from countless video logs. The holographic display showed promising results. Her theory about stable quantum pairs across vast distances was proving correct. What Sarah didn't know was that she wasn't the only one monitoring these results. 40,000 kilometers above Earth's surface, the Galactic observation vessel registered an anomaly. Their scientists had been watching humanity's technological progress for decades, but this was different. Commander X-427 studied the energy signatures with growing concern. "This human has achieved partial quantum harmony," he noted to his crew, "far sooner than our models predicted." The Krylaxians, with their hive mind social structure, had never fully understood human relationships, viewing them as inefficient and chaotic. Yet they couldn't deny humanity's rapid advancement, especially in recent years. Marcus Rodriguez sat in his apartment across town, cleaning his service weapon. Old habits died hard. After 15 years in special forces and 5 in private security, he'd developed a sixth sense for trouble. Tonight, that sense was screaming. He and Sarah had planned to meet for dinner, but she'd messaged earlier about needing to complete one more test sequence. The quantum chamber's hum reached a crescendo just as Sarah's instruments detected something impossible, a quantum signature that wasn't her own. The air in the lab grew heavy, charged with otherworldly energy. She barely had time to hit the emergency shutdown before reality itself seemed to twist. "Specimen acquired," X-427 announced as Sarah materialized in their containment chamber. "Begin the analysis." The Krylaxians had chosen her not just for her scientific achievements, but because of her connection to Marcus. They had observed how human pair bonds seemed to drive exceptional behavior, and they wanted to understand this potential weakness. Marcus felt it before he heard anything. A subtle vibration through his apartment floor, a static charge that made his hair stand on end. His phone buzzed. A security breach alert from Sarah's lab. The camera feeds showed nothing but static, yet the quantum chamber's emergency shutdown had been activated. He was moving before conscious thought, muscle memory from years of operations taking over. His go bag was already in the car, along with equipment most civilians didn't know existed. Sarah had often teased him about being paranoid, but Marcus had seen enough classified files during his service to know that paranoia was sometimes just good planning. The lab was in chaos when he arrived. Security personnel swarmed the building, but Marcus knew they were already too late. The residual energy readings from his specialized equipment told a story few would believe. A targeted extraction using technology far beyond human capability. But Marcus wasn't most humans. During his final years in special forces, he'd been part of a classified unit that investigated unexplained phenomena. They'd never made official contact, but they'd found enough evidence to know humanity wasn't alone. He'd kept certain connections, maintained access to networks that officially didn't exist. In the lab, he found what he was looking for, traces of a specific radiation signature he'd seen only once before, during an operation in the Atacama Desert. The Krylaxians had been careless this time, too confident in their technological superiority. They didn't understand that taking Sarah wasn't just an abduction for study, it was a declaration of war. As emergency response teams continued their futile investigation, Marcus was already making calls. Old teammates, retired analysts, and specialists who owed him favors. This wouldn't be like other abduction cases that disappeared into government files. The Krylaxians had made a fundamental mistake in their calculations. They had assessed human relationships as a weakness to exploit, never considering that they might instead be humanity's greatest strength. Above Earth, Sarah awoke in a sterile chamber, her scientific mind already analyzing her surroundings despite her fear. The Krylaxians watched, expecting terror or breakdown. Instead, they saw something they didn't understand: determination. Sarah had spent her career proving the impossible was possible. Now she just had to survive long enough for Marcus to find her. And she had no doubt that he would. The hunt begins. Marcus's apartment had become an impromptu command center within hours of Sarah's abduction. Screens covered every available surface, each displaying different data streams, satellite feeds, and decoded transmissions. The air was thick with coffee and determination as three people hunched over their workstations. "You're absolutely certain about this signature?" Dr. Maya Patil asked, her eyes never leaving the spectral analysis of the radiation found in Sarah's lab. As the former head of cinephysics at Darabia, she'd spent decades studying potential alien technologies. Marcus had pulled her out of retirement for this, knowing her expertise was unmatched. "I've seen it before," Marcus confirmed, pulling up classified files on his secure terminal. "Atacama Desert, 2045. We tracked similar readings but lost them in the upper atmosphere." The official story was atmospheric phenomena. The truth was something else entirely. The third member of their makeshift team, Trevor Williams, looked up from his array of custom-built quantum sensors. The former NSA cryptographer had gone off the grid years ago, convinced that traditional security agencies weren't prepared for extraterrestrial threats. "The quantum signature is still active," he announced. "It's faint, but it's there. Whatever they used to take her, it left a trace we can follow." Marcus studied the data streaming across his screens. The Krylaxians had made their first mistake. They'd assumed Earth's technology was too primitive to detect their quantum transportation system. But Sarah's research had already been pushing those boundaries, and her equipment had captured crucial data during the abduction. "Here's what we know," Marcus began, bringing up a holographic display. "The Krylaxians have been watching us for at least 30 years. They're advanced, but they're not infallible. Their technology relies heavily on quantum mechanics, which is exactly what Sarah was researching. That's not a coincidence." Maya nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "The radiation signature suggests their ships use a form of quantum propulsion. It's similar to what Sarah was theorizing in her latest paper. They must have been monitoring her work, realized she was getting close to something they thought we shouldn't have." "But why take her?" Trevor wondered aloud. "If they wanted to stop the research, there are easier ways." Marcus pulled up Sarah's personal files, which he'd accessed using emergency protocols she'd given him years ago. "Because they're not just studying our technology. They're studying us. Look at her research notes from the week before the abduction. She was working on quantum entanglement patterns that mimicked human neural networks. She theorized that consciousness itself might have quantum properties." Maya's eyes widened as she made the connection. "They're not just studying our technology. They're studying human consciousness, human connections. That's why they took her instead of just destroying her research." The revelation hit Marcus hard. The Krylaxians hadn't just taken Sarah because of her work. They'd taken her because of her connection to them. They were studying human relationships, trying to understand how they influenced human behavior and capabilities. Trevor's quantum sensors suddenly spiked, alarms blaring across multiple screens. "We've got something. The signature's getting stronger. They're back in Earth's orbit." Marcus was already moving, grabbing specialized equipment he'd acquired through channels best left unmentioned. "Maya, can you isolate their location?" "Better than that," she replied, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards. "I can tap into their communication frequency. Sarah's research on quantum harmonics gave us the key. They're using quantum entanglement for instantaneous communication across vast distances." The screens filled with streams of alien data, patterns that would have been meaningless to most humans. But Trevor had spent years preparing for this moment. "It's encrypted, but it's not unbreakable. Their quantum encryption assumes capabilities we shouldn't have. They don't know about Sarah's breakthroughs." Hours passed as they worked, each bringing their unique expertise to bear on the problem. Maya decoded the alien propulsion signatures, Trevor cracked their communication protocols, and Marcus planned. The Krylaxians had superior technology, but they'd made a crucial error in judgment. They'd assumed technological superiority meant total superiority. What they hadn't counted on was human adaptability, human determination, and most importantly, human anger. As the first decoded transmissions came through, Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. The Krylaxians were discussing their specimen with clinical detachment, noting with confusion that she wasn't responding as their behavioral models had predicted. "Of course she isn't," Marcus muttered. "Your models don't account for love." The breakthrough came just before dawn. Trevor's decryption algorithms finally cracked the Krylaxians' secure channel, giving them access to the ship's internal communications. The aliens were frustrated, their carefully controlled experiment yielding unexpected results. Sarah wasn't breaking down as they'd expected. Instead, she was asking questions, analyzing their technology, adapting. "She's not just surviving," Maya observed, reading through the translations. "She's studying them right back." Marcus felt a surge of pride mixed with worry. It was exactly what he would have expected from Sarah, but it also meant she was drawing more attention than might be safe. They needed to move fast. "I've got it," Trevor exclaimed suddenly. "Their quantum drive. It has a fatal flaw. They're so focused on efficiency, they never considered someone might deliberately create quantum interference." Sarah's research wasn't just getting close to their technology. It was about to expose its biggest weakness. Marcus leaned forward, hope and determination hardening into resolve. "How long until we can deploy a countermeasure?" "Hours, maybe less," Maya answered. "But Marcus, this isn't just about getting Sarah back anymore. If we do this, if we prove we can affect their technology, it changes everything." First contact wasn't supposed to happen this way. "They made that choice when they took her," Marcus replied, checking his equipment one final time. "Now they get to deal with the consequences." As the sun rose over Seattle, 3 humans prepared to do what their alien observers had thought impossible: fight back. The Krylaxians had wanted to study human relationships. They were about to get a very practical demonstration of just how far a human would go for someone they loved. The observation chamber on the Krylaxian vessel hummed with an energy that made Sarah's teeth ache. After what she estimated to be 5 days in captivity, she'd learned to read the subtle variations in that hum. They corresponded to different types of scanning equipment. Right now, they were trying to analyze her brain patterns again. "Your persistence is inefficient," the metallic voice of her primary observer stated. Sarah had named him Blue, for the subtle cerulean tint to his crystalline exoskeleton. "You expend considerable energy maintaining mental barriers that serve no practical purpose." Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of her containment cell, eyes closed, focusing on the quantum equations she'd been working on before her abduction. She discovered that complex mathematical calculations created patterns in her neural activity that confused their scanning equipment. "Perhaps," she replied calmly, "you're asking the wrong questions." The Krylaxians had expected her to break down, to become overwhelmed by isolation and fear. Instead, she turned their observation into an opportunity for her own research. Every test they ran gave her more information about their technology. Every scan revealed more about their capabilities and their limitations. "Your species' attachment to individuals creates vulnerability," Blue continued, his crystalline appendages shifting in what Sarah had learned was a sign of frustration. "Yet you draw strength from these connections, even in isolation. This contradicts our models." Sarah opened her eyes, studying the alien being through the quantum barrier that separated them. "That's because your models are based on a fundamental misconception. You see our connections as chains that bind us. We see them as roots that help us grow." "Previous subjects," Sarah asked sharply. This was new information. "You've done this before." The Krylaxians conferred in their crystalline language, a symphony of chimes and resonances that Sarah was slowly learning to interpret. They hadn't meant to reveal that detail. Other specimens were studied. Blue finally admitted. Their responses were more aligned with our predictive models. Your resilience is anomalous. Sarah carefully filed this information away. The implications were disturbing, but it also meant something crucial. The Krylaxians could make mistakes. Their overconfidence in their models could be used against them. She felt a subtle shift in the quantum barrier's frequency. They were adjusting their containment protocols again. Each adjustment gave her more data, more understanding of the underlying principles. The Krylaxians didn't realize that their very attempts to study her were giving her the knowledge she needed to potentially escape. "We will now test your response to temporal displacement," Green announced. Previous specimens showed severe psychological deterioration when their perceived time flow was altered. Sarah's heart rate jumped, but she kept her expression neutral. This could be bad, or it could be exactly the opportunity she needed. The Krylaxians' mastery of quantum mechanics allowed them to manipulate time perception within localized fields. It was brilliant technology, but it was based on principles she understood. As the temporal field activated, Sarah focused on what she knew about quantum entanglement. Her research had suggested that consciousness itself might operate on quantum principles. If she was right, and if Marcus was looking for her, which she knew he would be, perhaps there was a way to send him a signal. The air around her began to shimmer as time itself became malleable. The Krylaxians watched, expecting her to crack under the psychological strain of experiencing time at a different rate than her natural biology dictated. Instead, Sarah began to recite quantum equations in her mind, focusing on the specific frequencies she'd been studying in her lab. What the Krylaxians didn't understand was that their temporal manipulation field was creating exactly the conditions Sarah needed. In their attempt to break her, they were actually giving her access to the quantum realm where their technology operated. Each adjustment they made helped her refine her calculations. Neural patterns are not conforming to expected parameters, Blue noted with increasing agitation. Subject is generating quantum resonance patterns similar to our communication frequencies. Sarah kept her face carefully blank, but inside she felt a surge of triumph. She couldn't send a message directly, but she could create quantum disturbances that anyone looking for Krylaxian technology might detect. And if she knew Marcus, he would have already assembled a team capable of detecting exactly that. The temporal field fluctuated as the Krylaxians tried to reassert control. They didn't realize that their perfect, predictable systems had met their match in human adaptability. Sarah wasn't just surviving their tests. She was using them to fight back. "Perhaps," she suggested calmly as the temporal field stabilized, "you should consider updating your models." Above her containment cell, warning indicators began to flash. The quantum disturbances she was creating were spreading through their systems, causing tiny but accumulating errors in their perfectly calibrated equipment. The Krylaxians had thought they were testing her breaking point. Instead, they were about to discover their own. The stolen Krylaxian shuttle hummed with alien energy as Marcus guided it through Earth's upper atmosphere. Maya's modifications to the craft's quantum signature made it appear as space debris to both Earth's detection systems and Krylaxian sensors. Behind him, Trevor worked frantically at a jury-rigged console, monitoring the increasingly erratic quantum disturbances emanating from the Krylaxian mothership. "These patterns," Trevor said, his voice thick with excitement, "they're not random. They're following advanced quantum equations, Sarah's equations. She's deliberately creating quantum noise." Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. Of course she was. While the Krylaxians had been trying to study her, Sarah had been studying them right back. "Can you use it to pinpoint her location on the ship?" "Better than that." Maya cut in, her hands dancing across the alien controls she'd partially decoded. "She's not just creating noise. She's disrupting their entire quantum network. Their ships operate on perfect mathematical harmony. Sarah's introducing chaos into their systems." The shuttle's viewscreen suddenly illuminated with the massive form of the Krylaxian mothership. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Under normal circumstances, their small shuttle wouldn't have stood a chance of approaching undetected. But these weren't normal circumstances. Their defensive grid is destabilizing. Trevor reported. The quantum fluctuations are cascading through their systems. Sarah's turned their whole ship into a quantum vulnerability. Marcus had seen a lot in his years of special operations, but nothing compared to this. The Krylaxians had abducted Sarah thinking they would study human weakness. Instead, they'd given one of Earth's brightest minds direct access to their most advanced technology. Multiple signatures breaking off from the mothership, Maya announced. Scout vessels. They're searching for the source of the disruption, but Sarah's quantum noise is masking our approach. The shuttle's interior suddenly filled with a high-pitched whine as they passed through the outer layers of the Krylaxians' defensive field. Trevor's instruments were going haywire, displaying readings that shouldn't have been possible. She's created a quantum resonance cascade. Maya breathed, staring at the data. The equations she was working on before they took her, they weren't just about communication. She was theorizing ways to manipulate quantum fields on a massive scale. Marcus remembered the nights he'd spent listening to Sarah excitedly explain her research. He hadn't understood all the physics, but he'd understood her passion, her brilliance. The Krylaxians had thought they were dealing with a simple test subject. They had no idea they'd handed their technology to someone who'd already been figuring out how to manipulate it. "We've got a problem," Trevor interrupted. "They're adapting to her disruptions, starting to isolate sections of their quantum network. We've got maybe 20 minutes before they regain full control." Marcus nodded, checking his modified weapons. The quantum disruptors they'd built using Sarah's research were untested, but in theory, they should be able to temporarily disable Krylaxian technology. "Maya, can you get us to their containment level?" "Already plotting the course." "But Marcus, their internal security will be different. We won't be able to hide once we're inside." "We don't need to hide," Marcus replied. "We just need to reach Sarah before they realize what's really happening." The shuttle slipped through a gap in the mothership's destabilized shields, finding purchase in what appeared to be an emergency access port. As they prepared to board, the ship's internal lighting suddenly shifted to a deep purple. "Alert status," Maya translated from the alien symbols flashing across their screens. "They've realized something's wrong with their containment systems." Marcus checked his team's quantum synchronization bands, devices they'd created based on Sarah's research that should protect them from the worst effects of Krylaxian defensive technology. "Remember, we're not just fighting their security. We're fighting their entire worldview. They literally cannot comprehend why we're here." The Krylaxian ship's interior was a maze of crystalline corridors that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Without Maya's decoded schematics and Trevor's quantum tracking of Sarah's disturbance patterns, they would have been lost instantly. "Contact," Trevor warned as two Krylaxian security drones rounded a corner. Their crystalline forms hummed with deadly energy, but before they could react, Marcus's quantum disruptor fired. The aliens' forms seemed to flicker and freeze, their perfectly ordered quantum structure temporarily chaotic. "It worked," Maya said, quickly scanning the disabled drones. "Sarah's disruptions weakened their quantum cohesion. Our weapons are twice as effective as they should be." They moved deeper into the ship, following the strengthening trail of quantum disruption. Every security system they encountered was already partially compromised, fighting against the chaos Sarah had introduced into their network. The Krylaxians' greatest strength, their perfect quantum harmony, had become a vulnerability. "Marcus," Trevor called out, his voice urgent. "These readings, Sarah's not just disrupting their systems anymore. She's rewriting them. The quantum fluctuations have a pattern now. She's trying to tell us something." Maya's eyes widened as she analyzed the data. "These aren't random frequencies. They're coordinates. She's not just fighting them. She's leading us straight to her." The ship shuddered around them as more systems fell into chaos. Through it all, Marcus could feel something building, a crescendo of quantum energy that even their rudimentary human instruments could barely comprehend. "Their containment level is just ahead," Maya reported. But we've got company coming. A lot of it. Marcus readied his weapons as the sound of approaching Krylaxian security forces echoed through the crystalline corridors. The aliens had finally realized the full scope of what was happening. That this wasn't just an equipment malfunction or a containment breach. This was humanity's response to their presumption. Sarah's quantum signature is spiking, Trevor warned. Whatever she's planning, she's doing it now. The corridor ahead of them blazed with alien energy as Krylaxian defenders took up positions. Behind them, more security forces were closing in. They were trapped between two forces, each capable of destroying them instantly. But Marcus smiled, because he could feel it. The subtle shift in the ship's quantum field had told him Sarah wasn't just waiting to be rescued. She was about to remind their alien captors why underestimating humanity was the last mistake they'd ever make. The quantum barrier around Sarah's containment cell pulsed with impossible patterns as she pushed her equations to their limit. The Krylaxians had given her exactly what she needed: direct access to their quantum network and plenty of time to understand it. Now, as Marcus and his team fought their way through the ship, she prepared to demonstrate just how much she'd learned. Your efforts are causing significant system instability, Blue warned, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. Cease these actions immediately. Sarah stood in the center of her cell, eyes closed, mind focused on the quantum equation she'd spent years developing. You know what your biggest mistake was? She asked calmly. You assumed that because you couldn't understand our connections, they weren't real. The ship's quantum field suddenly surged as Sarah's calculations reached their critical point. She hadn't just been creating random disruptions. She'd been carefully building a quantum resonance that matched the exact frequency of human consciousness. The same frequency she'd detected in her lab on Earth, the one that had drawn the Krylaxians' attention in the first place. Outside her cell, Marcus, Maya, and Trevor found themselves caught between two groups of Krylaxian security forces. But just as the aliens prepared to fire, every quantum weapon in the corridor suddenly deactivated. Now, Marcus shouted, firing his disruptor at the crystalline walls themselves. The structure began to vibrate at a frequency that matched Sarah's quantum disruptions, creating a cascade effect throughout the ship's systems. Inside the control room, the Krylaxian command structure was in chaos. Their perfectly ordered quantum network was being overwhelmed by patterns they couldn't predict or control. Human consciousness, with its inherent quantum properties that Sarah had theorized about, was proving more powerful than their technology. The specimen must be terminated, Green announced, reaching for the containment cell's emergency protocols. But before he could activate them, Sarah opened her eyes. You wanted to understand human connections, she asked. Let me show you. The quantum barrier around her cell didn't shatter, it transformed. The energy field that had been containing her became a conduit, channeling the unique quantum signature of human consciousness throughout the ship's systems. Sarah had turned their own containment technology into a broadcast network. Marcus felt it the moment it happened. The quantum synchronization bands they wore suddenly resonated with a familiar frequency, Sarah's frequency. Through the quantum field that permeated the ship, she had created a direct link to every human aboard. Their weapons are completely offline, Maya reported, watching in amazement as the Krylaxian security forces struggled to maintain their coherence. Sarah's quantum resonance is disrupting their entire collective consciousness. The crystalline corridors began to pulse with a new kind of energy as Sarah's quantum equations rewrote the very fabric of the ship's reality. The Krylaxians had built their technology on perfect mathematical harmony, never considering that the chaotic quantum patterns of human consciousness might be equally powerful. Get clear of the containment level. Sarah's voice echoed through their quantum link. I'm about to give our friends a practical demonstration of quantum entanglement. Marcus didn't hesitate. Fall back, he ordered, leading his team away from the increasingly unstable section of the ship. Behind them, the Krylaxian forces were retreating as well, their perfectly ordered minds unable to cope with the chaos Sarah had introduced into their systems. In the containment cell, Sarah stood at the center of a quantum storm of her own making. The equations she'd been working on in her lab hadn't just been about communication. They had been about proving that consciousness itself was a quantum phenomenon, one that could influence and be influenced by quantum fields. Warning: the ship's automated systems announced in their crystalline language. Critical quantum cascade imminent. Consciousness coherence failure detected. Blue and Green watched in horror as their careful experiment spiraled completely out of control. The human they had fought to study had instead turned their entire ship into a proving ground for her theories about quantum consciousness. "What are you?" Blue demanded, his crystalline form vibrating with confusion and fear. Sarah smiled. "I'm human. We're not just individuals, and we're not just a collective. We're something you never considered. A quantum superposition of both. Our connections don't make us weak. They make us infinite." The containment cell erupted with pure quantum energy as Sarah released the full power of her equations. Throughout the ship, every system connected to the quantum network began to resonate with the unique frequency of human consciousness. The Krylaxians' perfect harmony was shattered, replaced by something far more complex and beautiful. Marcus and his team reached their shuttle just as the ship's quantum field reached critical resonance. Through their link, they could feel Sarah guiding the cascade, using the Krylaxians' own technology to force them to experience something they had never understood: the true power of human connection. "You have two choices," Sarah's voice echoed through the ship's quantum network, reaching every Krylaxian consciousness simultaneously. "You can fight against this new harmony and watch your systems tear themselves apart, or you can adapt, learn, understand that there are forms of connection you haven't discovered yet." In the command center, the Krylaxian leadership faced a reality they had never prepared for. Their perfect models, their assumptions about consciousness and connection, had been completely upended. The humans they had sought to study had instead taught them a lesson about the true nature of quantum existence. Hours later, as Earth's authorities scrambled to respond to the massive alien ship now visible in orbit, Sarah stood with Marcus on the shuttle's observation deck. Below them, the Krylaxian mothership pulsed with a new kind of energy, a harmony that blended their crystalline perfection with the quantum complexity of human consciousness. "They'll be back," Sarah said, watching the alien ship prepare to depart, "but not as observers or experimenters. They'll come as equals, ready to learn." Marcus took her hand, feeling the quantum resonance that still lingered between them, as scientific proof of what they had always known. "They wanted to understand human connections," he said. "I'd say they got one hell of a demonstration." The Krylaxian ship shimmered and vanished into quantum space, leaving behind a changed universe. They had come seeking to study human weakness, only to discover that what they had perceived as weakness was actually humanity's greatest strength. In their quest to understand human connections, they had instead learned a fundamental truth about the universe itself: that consciousness, love, and quantum mechanics were all part of the same magnificent equation. And somewhere in the vast quantum field that connected all things, the first seeds of understanding began to grow between two very different species, each with something profound to teach the other about the true nature of existence.